So Kathy, I did that as quickly as I could. How'd I do?
It was brilliant. I love charts. They don't lie. At least we don't think so. But I can tell you, I just got back from our subdivisions in Reno and Carson City and Park City. And it's exactly as you said, we have people without any marketing at all. We have people begging to reserve lots that where we don't even have the roads in or the utilities. I mean, in all of these locations and Tampa as well. So, right,
Yep.
that's pretty, oh, and Bozeman, Montana. So we are across the board, across the country, seeing that exact situation because people have the ability now to live anywhere and like the idea of a new home, and there's just simply not enough inventory out there. So I can say firsthand that's what we're seeing, and the same with the rentals. We have over 50,000 members at Real Wealth, and when we do surveys, we have not seen issues with rents coming in, just as your slides show, because people don't want to get booted and they don't want bad credit so they can't get their next house. It's the housing has moved to the top of the list of necessities, right?
So two quick points on the rents, Kathy, that I think are I'm seeing a dichotomy in press reporting. There's a set of reporters who are hell bent on creating panic, and they keep writing stories about how 20, 30 million people are going to lose their homes
Yeah.
to eviction, and it drives me insane because the basis of their research is there's a study that came out, a research report that came out that asked people if they were concerned about their ability to make their rent payments. Well, there's a difference between being concerned about making a rent payment, actually making a rent payment, and eventually being evicted because you haven't made a number of rent payments. And those things are all connected, but they're not all the same thing. The other thing I have seen though, and by the way, it runs completely counter to all the published reports that show percentage of rents paid on time, percentage of rents paid overall. And those numbers typically are running anywhere from 2 to 3% worse than they were a year ago, which is really impressive considering, how deep that recession was and how quickly it hit. But the other thing I'm hearing anecdotally is that the real problems are with the lower priced rental units, the lower priced apartments, where we have more displaced employees because of again, the nature of the job losses, who are having a harder time making their payments. But the higher up you get in terms of prices, and that would probably include most single family rental homes, the payment rates have been extraordinarily strong. And we are seeing one other trend, which I think you were alluding to, which is that while rental prices in some of the major urban areas, I think New York prices on new rentals are the lowest they've been in 10 years, which still makes them higher than almost anywhere else on the planet, but they're lower than they've been in 10 years. But suburban rent prices are going up.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
so a lot of interesting trends going on in the rental market.
Yeah, it's you've got to be so careful at making assumptions. And
Yep.
it was just a year ago that I was at a multifamily mastermind, and put the person next to me was fairly new to investing in multifamily, and made a comment about how he was focusing on kind of C minus class apartments in Dallas because they're recession proof. And I said, well, I would be careful about making that assumption, and also making the assumption that you'll be able to increase rents every year, which is a lot of these pro formas were doing. And the argument was, no. If there's a recession, then the A class moves down to B and the B class moves to C, and C class will always have renters. And that's not the case. So I don't know how he's doing on his project now, but it's just kind of an interesting assumption. I don't think that was actually true in last recessions either. I think the C-class properties got hit pretty hard then too.
Yeah, probably. And again, you're dealing with lower wage employees typically in those apartments, and those are the employees who have no cash reserves whatsoever. They're living paycheck to paycheck, probably underwater every time they get a paycheck. And now it'll be interesting to see what happens with the new administration coming into office, because they've finally, which did include a $25 billion fund for rentals. Also included enhanced unemployment benefits, which should help a lot of those tenants. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. And before you think I'm talking about what a wonderful bill it is, I am fully aware of the fact that in the $2.3 trillion that was allocated, less than 7% was actually set aside to go directly to consumers. So awful bill, but better
But the
than nothing.
Smithsonian's going to get $1 billion, so yay.
Yes, and we won't get into all the other interesting topics there,
Right.
will we?
Okay, well, let's go to some of these questions. I think I know what you're going to say to this. What website should I go to get this kind of data?
So
Yes.
actually, you'll be surprised by one of my answers, which is I really like calculated risk. It's a free website. Bill McBride, who's an economist, puts it out there, and he has all these home sales numbers and housing starts numbers and all that kind of good stuff. So that's a good site to go to. If you're looking for foreclosure information, obviously I'd recommend our site, Realty Track. But the other thing really is I find that there are people that I follow on social media who make this easy and post a lot of this kind of information. And so we do a lot of that on our blog, on the Realty Track blog. And I do a lot of that on my personal social media channels. I know Kathy put some of this information out there, people that we both follow. So, find a couple of people who cover this space, and they'll do a lot of the legwork for you. Kathy, I can't hear you. Jill, do you have access to any of the questions while we're waiting?
I do. Let me just pop open my little question box here. Let's see what we've got. Okay. For first-time investment buyers, would it be a good idea to wait for some foreclosures auctions to begin again, despite there not being a large wave of foreclosures coming like the last crisis?
That's a really, really good question. I typically steer first-time investors away from foreclosure auctions because they are the riskiest stage of foreclosure to buy a property in. If you're a fix and flip investor, auctions are a good opportunity because you're probably going to get the lowest price. If you're a buy and hold, buy and rent investor, you don't need to be as concerned about getting the lowest possible price as you do need to be concerned about your cash flow returns. So you're probably able to absorb a little bit higher price and pay closer to market value. But I would still suggest looking at the properties in the early stages of default. We call those pre-foreclosures on the Realty Track website. And in every state, when somebody gets that pre-foreclosure or that initial notice of default, they have a preset period of time during which they can try and resolve the deficiency. And one of the ways they can do that, obviously, is by selling the property. So the closer they get to that auction date, the more motivated they are to try and sell the property. And a lot of investors have very successfully worked with distressed sellers during that phase. The reason I suggest being careful about the auctions is because you have to buy those things without doing an interior inspection. You need to make sure you know what you're doing in terms of title research, and make sure you know what you're buying. I had a customer once who was very happy to tell me that he just bought a house for $20,000 at an auction, when in fact what he purchased was a second lien, which did him absolutely no good. So you got to be really careful about that. So if you're not working with another investor who can kind of walk you through, or a real estate professional or real estate attorney who can walk you through those, I'd say for a first-time investor, you're better off waiting for the bank repossession or buying from a distressed homeowner earlier in the foreclosure process.
All right, great. Question here. What steps should real estate investors looking to buy properties at a discount take now to prepare for opportunities?
Great question also. And Kathy, I'm sorry you're not able to talk on this one because you do this for a living. There are a couple of things that come immediately to mind for me. One is get your financing in order. Whether you're going to be buying cash or you're going to be financing it through private money, or if you're able to get conventional financing maybe on a rental property, get your financing in order early so that when the time comes to move, you're ready to move instantly, because these properties, when they do come to market, are moving really, really quickly. In a lot of cases, before they're actually even listed. So that's something I would do now. And also do your research on markets you're interested in. If you're looking at a rental property, take a look at what rental rates are in those areas. Take a look at vacancy rates. If you're looking to do fix and flip, take a look at what the price trends are in a given market in terms of list prices and sales prices, the sales volume going through. Get out and do your research on neighborhoods that you might be interested in. Again, these are if you're looking at local markets. If you're looking at distant markets and you're going to be working with a team, make sure you put your team in place so that you have feet on the street who can do an assessment of property conditions and things like that for when the time comes. So do your homework, know where you want to move, know what your plan is for when you get into the market, and get your financing in order. And to me, those are all kind of fundamental things you want to do before you get started.
All right. Kathy is logging back in.
Can you hear me now?
I see that.
Yes.
Yay! Oh, you know what? If it doesn't work, turn it off and turn it back on.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I was just saying too many I don't know, whatever. It was lots of people on the internet. Okay, so Section 8, anything, somebody that was a surprising winner over the last 6 months. I guess not that surprising with the government paying housing. Do you see any change to that? Anything you've heard, will there be an increase to Section 8 housing? Uh-oh, now I lost Rick.
I would be shocked if there weren't an increase in.
Oh, we got you now.
Can you hear me? Okay. I would be shocked if there weren't an increase in funding for Section 8. I almost can't see a scenario where you don't have more of that in the Biden administration. Interestingly, I think a lot of these affordable rental market programs are going to keep Fannie and Freddie entrenched in conservatorship for a while, because I believe that's how the administration will pay for some of these affordable housing programs. They'll tack on more fees to Fannie and Freddie backed loans, which they'll use to offset the cost for some of these rental programs. So it could make it marginally more expensive for people getting conventional loans, with the flip side being maybe not quite so many renters will be rent burdened as they have been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people thought in the past that Section 8 would be a riskier type investment, but we really found it to be a solid investment, certainly this past year. Let's see. So I think you already went over this a lot, but the question is, are people in forbearance the same as pre-foreclosure?
Yeah, no, I may as well talk about this again, because there's a lot of confusion out there. People in forbearance are not in any stage of foreclosure, pre-foreclosure or otherwise. In fact, technically, they're not delinquent on their loans because they are in a grace period that the government has established. Their credit isn't allowed to be dinged. They're not getting any extra fees or fines. There's no penalties for being in the program. Where they wind up in trouble is if they leave the program without a repayment plan in place with their lender. So they can not make a payment for a full year, and as long as they agree to some sort of repayment program on the day after they leave the program, they get to start all over again as current borrowers. So no, pre-foreclosure really isn't a technical industry term. It's something we use just to identify stages of the foreclosure process. But again, our terminology is once somebody gets that first legal notice of default, and typically that means they've missed 90 to 120 days of payments, we put them in the pre-foreclosure category, which just means they're on the way to that foreclosure auction. But don't confuse those with the people that are in forbearance.
Yeah, I mean, the huge difference here is that people lost their jobs not because of something they did. They were, in many cases, not allowed to go back to work. And so it's a very unusual situation. And like you said, Rick, I mean, we're both being interviewed all the time in the news and on mainstream media. And And, it's not just a handful of reporters who want to sound like the sky is falling. It is the business. It's if it bleeds, it leads. If it's going to scare you, you'll watch, and more advertising can be sold. So the headlines that are out there can be extremely confusing. So don't fall for it. Listen to experts in the industry to find out what's really going on. Because sure, there's a lot of people who haven't paid, but they've been legally allowed to not pay. It's not dinging them in any way. I would take advantage of it if I could. I mean, why not? So it doesn't mean they're in distress.
The other thing you never see in those stories, Kathy, is how these numbers compare to last year's numbers. So they throw a huge number out at you. 500,000 people didn't pay their mortgage last month. Okay. Last year at the same time, 350,000 people didn't pay their mortgage. So there's always some baseline that COVID is added to, that the recession is added to, but they only give you the big number because that's the number that gets everybody's attention. I'm hoping that maybe they just don't know any better and that they're not purposely misleading people. But that is something you have to keep in mind. There's always, historically 1% of people were in some stage of foreclosure. There's 50 million active mortgages. That means normally 500,000 people wouldn't be making their payment. So keep that in mind. And again, prior to the pandemic, we were at about half that rate. So it was a very strong economy, very strong housing market, very strong loan performance before we got into this mess.